You've probably had some success losing fat in the past, but you've never been able to get as lean as you want or maintain the results once you're there. It's incredibly frustrating to keep trying and failing, and also to be fed so many mixed messages from people online. In this Fat Loss Masterclass, I'm going to give you a step-by-step process for getting into your best shape using the most up-to-date science blended with practical tips. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dean, one of the performance nutritionists here at Triage Method. We're a team of doctors, nutritionists and scientists who've been helping people get into the best shape of their lives for the last 10 years. With all that being said, let's get into the video. To lose body fat, we need to create a calorie deficit, and this is the primary and only driver of fat loss. We can do this by eating less calories or burning more energy through activity, and ideally, we'll do both. Our metabolism is made up of 4 components: basal metabolic rate, thermic effect of food, exercise activity thermogenesis, and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And I'll get into each one of those in a moment. We bring all this together, it creates our total daily energy expenditure. And from here, we'll begin creating a calorie deficit. Now, the key thing to understand with your metabolism is there's 3 components that you can change and 1 that you can't. The one that you can't change is your basal metabolic rate. We'll be manipulating the other 3 with our daily habits, specifically with our exercise and nutrition. To make the calculation of your calories very simple, we're going to use the Triage calorie calculator. And you can find this on our website. It's totally free and you don't even have to enter your email. From here, you're going to enter your height, your age, your weight, your activity level as a general estimation, and then you're going to decide how aggressive you want your deficit to be. For most of you, I'd recommend staying away from a very aggressive deficit of losing 1.5% of your body weight per week and going between 0.5% and 1% body weight per week. You'll then see your maintenance calories and your goal targets. Now, your maintenance calories is the same as your TDEE, and that's then where we're going to take the calories away to create the goal targets. This isn't a perfect number because calorie calculations are never going to be totally individualized to each person, but it's a pretty good estimate. After a few weeks of eating at these calories consistently, you'll know whether you're losing weight and your body composition is changing. And we'll get into all of that in much more detail later on. Once you've got these numbers, then you can plug them into an app like MyFitnessPal, and that allows you to translate the food that you're eating on a daily basis and logging with these actual calories and then the macros. I mentioned earlier that we can't really manipulate basal metabolic rate, but that we can manipulate the other 3. So let's get into how we'll do that now. Exercise activity thermogenesis is driven by formal exercise. So any resistance training or cardio or even any sports you're doing. At Triage, we recommend that all of our clients resistance train and cardio because there are unique benefits to both. If you're losing body fat, you probably have an overarching goal of improving body composition overall. And fat loss is only one side of that coin. You also need to be building muscle so that you get the best results. A lot of people will try and use exercise as a fat loss tool, but the reality is it's actually a very poor driver of fat loss overall. You can see from this paper where they measured fat loss in different groups that done exercise only, diet only, and diet and exercise together. The results show that people who only changed their exercise habits rather than exercise and diet combined didn't have very meaningful changes in their body fat. This is why exercise is better utilized as a separate goal. So to improve your health, increase muscle mass and strength, or to improve at a specific sport. Of course, exercise does contribute, but you need to combine it with long-term dietary change to see the big results. Thermic effect of food is next. This is simply the amount of energy that you burn to digest your food. Out of the 4 components of your metabolism, this is the smallest effect, but we can still move it into a positive direction by eating a high-protein diet. And in the next section, I'll speak a lot more on protein and how to implement that more into your dietary pattern. Fat burns the least amount in the digestive process, so that's why we might want to limit that a little bit more with our approach too. Out of the 3 changeable components of your metabolism, non-exercise activity thermogenesis probably has the biggest effect. Now, you might have seen the magical 10,000 steps guideline from the World Health Organization, but this isn't something that you need to stick to strictly. You get substantial benefits from both a health and a fat loss perspective from even 6,000 to 8,000 steps per day, especially if you're somebody that has a desk job or you live a more sedentary lifestyle. Simple way to figure this out is to track your steps on your phone or on a fitness device like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. See where your standardized steps are across the week and then try and increase that if it's below 6,000 to 8,000. This won't have a huge effect over a few days or weeks, but when you map it out across multiple weeks and months, then you start to see more of an impact. To visualize this, let's say you burn 200 calories from doing 4,000 to 5,000 extra steps per day, and you do that for a year. This would be like burning an extra 73,000 calories per year. There's approximately 3,500 calories in 1 pound of fat. So if we do some simple division here, that's like burning an extra 20 pounds of fat across the entire year. just from increasing your step count by 4,000 to 5,000 per day. Now this is a flawed example because obviously it's not as simple as burn an extra 200 calories per day and lose 20 pounds of fat over a year, as we saw from the exercise versus diet study from earlier. A big part of this is because your body is an energy hoarding machine, and we can see this demonstrated in something called the constrained energy model. As you can see from the graphic, your body will adapt to the increases in energy burn from walking by changing other components of your metabolism. In simple terms, you might calculate that you've burned 100 calories from walking, but you might really have only burned 75 calories. This is a big part of the reason why when people diet for long enough, they eventually hit a plateau, because your body wants to stop you from losing fat, otherwise you would die. Through this metabolic adaptation, what was once your calorie deficit is now much closer to your maintenance calories, where your body will just maintain the weight. But don't let this put you off increasing your activity, because if you standardize your steps, you can largely overcome this issue. And then we'll combine this with the biggest factor that allows you to strip off body fat, i.e. changing your diet. And what's up next? There tends to be a lot of confusion with macros, but I'm going to make it ridiculously simple to understand in this next section. We'll talk briefly on each macro's role, how much you should be having, and then we'll translate that into food. Fat has the highest amount of calories per gram and also burns the least in the digestive process. Now, there is a certain amount of fat that you need for essential functions in the body, but we can still limit it without affecting your health negatively. You generally want to choose healthy, unsaturated fats, like the ones found in extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, and avocado. This is because foods high in saturated fats, like butter, are associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And fatty meats are also associated with an increased risk of colorectal cancer. Now, of course, you don't need to limit them entirely, but it's just something to keep in mind. Carbs are next, and they're important for a few different reasons. They're cheaper to include in the diet, they'll fuel your gym and sports performance, and the healthier, higher fiber carbs are associated with an array of health benefits. Now, as we discussed in the previous section, protein burns more calories in the digestive process. Second, protein is one of two satiety levers that we can pull. Satiety is your feelings of fullness after a meal, and this is crucial when you're trying to lose body fat. You can see from this paper that protein is demonstrated to uniquely affect weight loss outcomes when compared to different groups that had differing levels of carbs and protein. This is important for carbs as well, because you'll often see online people saying things like the low carb diet is the best diet for weight loss. But in reality, it's the high protein nature of these low carb diets that are affecting the improved outcomes. If you combine a high protein with a low fat diet, the outcomes are the same as a high protein, low carb diet. This is all very important because what I always say to my fat loss clients is that calories are king, but hunger management is queen. And if you're not managing your hunger with your food choices, you're going to struggle with a fat loss diet. Finally, a high protein diet is also essential if you're trying to build muscle, and you should be. So it'll have a synergistic effect here. If you use the Triage calorie calculator, you'll see that we give you specific recommendations for each macro. We recommend around 2 grams of protein per kg of body weight, because in the research, this is where we see the best outcomes for satiety and also muscle building outcomes. For carbs, we set this a bit higher to optimize your performance in the gym and for sports. As a result, the fat macro has to be lower to make room for the calorie deficit we're creating. However, as fat loss is concerned, it doesn't really matter what the balance of carbs and fats are, as long as the calories are where they need to be and your protein is kept high. So if you have a personal preference for higher fat foods, then you can just lower your carbs to reflect that. Again, just be aware that that fat macro is over twice as calorie dense as carbs and protein. Protein sources on a fat loss diet are best kept lean to reduce the calories coming from fat. This list is going to be some of your best choices. We've already spoke about the difference between healthy and unhealthy fats, but here's a more comprehensive list for you. Finally, we have carbs, and this is where we're going to choose the healthier, higher volume and higher fiber choices. Because controlling your hunger is so important, we need to make sure that we're adding those high volume foods to the diet. And you can use these lists to help you when you're doing your shopping. Now, the conversation on carbs also leads us to the next section of the video, and the second lever of satiety, fiber. We spoke in the last section on the importance of satiety in helping you control your calorie intake and how protein interacts with this. Fibrous foods also play a similar role here. If we look at the typical Western diet, it's higher in refined carbs, refined sugars, fats, salt, and lower in lean proteins and fiber. So a fat loss diet should look to correct this. It also nicely moves you into a healthier diet pattern, so we're killing two birds with one stone here. Fiber increases satiety through a few different mechanisms. By slowing down the movement of food in your digestive tract, interacting with the release of hunger hormones, and increasing stomach distension by virtue of the volume found in these high fiber foods. Fiber is considered a type of carbohydrate in that it comes from plant matter, but because it's resistant to our digestion, we can't actually break it down into glucose like we would other sources of carbs like bread. Instead, the fibre is partially metabolized by the bacteria in our gut, and this increases the growth of good bacteria there, which exerts a number of positive health benefits. Now, there's many reasons to include fibre in the diet, such as these improvements in gut health, but it's also been shown to improve heart health by virtue of the fact that it lowers cholesterol. But the primary reason we want it in a fat loss diet is because it reduces the calorie content of our diet overall and improves our appetite control. In terms of fibre targets, you'll also see these given to you in the Triage calorie calculator. We recommend around 10 to 15 grams of fibre per 1,000 calories. However, intakes much higher than this have also been shown to be effective in health promoting. One final note on fibre is that if you currently don't eat a lot of it, it's better to increase the amount you consume slowly. This is because sharp increases in fibre can give some people digestive distress until their digestive system gets used to it. With hydration and fat loss, we just want to follow some very simple guidelines. Although there is an association between higher BMI and poor hydration, we can partially speculate that this is because people who have a higher BMI also eat less fruits and vegetables and also follow a less healthy diet and lifestyle overall. And this includes drinking less water. Now, I'm not saying that water intake has no effect on fat loss, because there are studies like this one that showed having a big glass of water before a meal reduced the amount of calories consumed overall. But from combining my understanding of the literature and from my coaching practice, it's better to have water as a foundational health and performance habit rather than a fat loss one. Being dehydrated is also easily correctable because you can get fluids from other sources such as fruits, vegetables, water-absorbing carbs, tea, coffee, sugar-free energy drinks, and sugar-free soda. So if you drink a couple of water bottles like this per day and you're getting fluids from other sources, it should be no problem to you. I also don't think there's much to the idea that hunger is sometimes masked by thirst, as they are distinct physiological processes. As a guideline, try to get around 40 mils of water per kg of body weight. You can also use this urine chart to give you a sense of how hydrated you are. Now we're going to get much more practical and talk about how to translate some of the science and concepts into everyday habits. We've talked a lot about tracking so far, but I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about some alternatives. For people that don't want to track calories because they find it a bit tedious or it doesn't suit their personality, there's multiple other choices. The first one is the hand portion control method. This is actually a fairly reliable method of controlling your portions, especially if you're following the principles of a fat loss diet. You could also use a habit tracking method. This is where you choose 2 to 3 habits to work on in a given week, track them in an app or in a journal, and then once you're happy that the implementation has been successful, you can add new ones or increase the difficulty level. Research on habits shows that it can take between 18 and 254 days for a habit to become automatic. This is a huge range and not very helpful because each individual person is going to be different. One key thing that's helpful from this research though is that if you miss engaging with a habit on a specific day, it doesn't affect the integration of that habit once you get back to it as soon as possible. Meal plans or meal templates can also be another helpful non-tracking method to use because it provides some scaffolding for you as you get started. I've provided meal templates for every calorie intake between 1,200 and 4,500 in the description below. You can also use ChatGPT to come up with a meal plan or template for you once you tell it your calories and macros. While meal templates can be helpful, you should look to move away from them over time and instead learn to become more flexible with your choices by following good nutrition principles. You can also combine any of these methods together and track using a food journal either digitally or on paper. We use this method quite often with Triage clients because it's a helpful accountability tool and also provides an opportunity for you to be reflective of your diet. Those are the main methods that you have if you don't want to track with MyFitnessPal. But if you do want to track, I'll link a video that allows you to use MyFitnessPal with the maximum accuracy. So far, we've spoke about food choices and different methods that you can use. But it's also important to zoom out a little bit with regards to your calorie intake and the food quality of your diet. It's much more helpful to look at your diet pattern across a week or even a month, rather than on singular days. This is because life is inherently chaotic and we all have massively varying circumstances and capabilities. This is where we can develop psychological flexibility with our fat loss diet. Your fat loss outcomes will be the exact same, even if you have some days that are higher in calories and some that are lower in calories. Or in other words, if your weekly calorie average is in line with your targeted deficit. I'll often even recommend higher and lower calorie days to my clients because this is reflective of changeable hunger levels, more intense training days, and things like wanting to socialize a little bit more on the weekends. Flexibility is also really important when looking at food quality as well. This is where we adopt an 80-20 approach. 80% whole, minimally processed, lean proteins and plant foods, and then 20% 5%, whatever you like. Sweets, chocolate, crisps, takeaways, and restaurant meals. Striving for perfection will only impede your ability to be consistent. Now, I mentioned the words minimally processed there, so I want to make a quick note on ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are heavily demonized, and you'll hear people saying that they directly cause weight gain and disease. This is only partially true, because while most people will get healthier and leaner from removing them, it's more so to do with the amount rather than the foods themselves. If we take something like a donut, for example, its primary components are oil, butter, sugar, and refined white flour. These ingredients make the donut very high in calories, low in nutrients, not very filling, and very easy to overeat. We could say that the sugar and white flour is causing insulin spikes, or the additives and fats are causing inflammation, and that's what's leading to fat gain. But this is untrue. The reality is these foods are just very high in calories, and you could smash 4, 5, 6 of them in one sitting. On the flip side, you have other foods that go through a lot of processing, like jarred sauces, tinned vegetables, tofu, whey protein, and whole grain bread, that can actually be quite health promoting and help you on your fat loss journey. So the categorization of these foods is not always clear cut, and you shouldn't let this be a major part of your mindset when you're losing fat, because once calories are accounted for and your diet is 80% whole foods, you're good to go. Next, I want to talk about meal timing, because it's very relevant and there's a couple of different directions you can go here. As a general rule, you should try and eat every 3 to 4 hours and have between 3 and 5 meals per day. The exception here is time-restricted feeding, which we'll talk about in a second. This is because if you leave large gaps in the day where you don't eat, your hunger levels are going to be difficult to get under control. So we want to try and get a balanced amount of food throughout the day. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have higher or lower calorie meals depending on your preference. Some people like to have a big breakfast, while others like to have a big dinner. There is some research that suggests biasing your calories to the earlier part of the day can improve appetite control, but it's more important to create a meal frequency that suits your preferences, training, sleep, and work schedule. Time-restricted feeding is useful, and it's something I use myself. If you're not hungry in the morning, take advantage of that and delay when you have your first meal. Again, we don't want you to get to a point where you're ravenously hungry or super low on energy, so some experimentation is needed here. You can also be strategic with your snacks. For my busy clients, I like to frame snacks as stepping stones between meals. You should follow the Protein and Plants guideline here as well, by having something like yogurt and fruit or a whey protein smoothie. Since we're on the topic of snacks, this is a good time to mention sneaky calories. These are calories that can demolish your deficit without you even knowing and make you feel like you're putting in a big effort without getting any results. This is a terrible place to be. Sneaky calories come in the form of mindless snacking, especially on chocolate, sweets and crisps, but also in the form of using a lot of oil in your cooking, liquid calories from milky or sugary coffees or other beverages, fatty proteins, breaded fish or chicken, salad dressings, mayonnaise, condiments, granola, nuts, and dried fruit. These all contribute to your calories a lot more than you think, and you should be wary of them because they can totally negate your calorie deficit. Finally, I want to talk about cooking and meal prep. If you can't cook or meal prep in some capacity, you will struggle with all of this, but you don't need to be Gordon Ramsay.
Where's the lamb sauce?
Here's my advice on this. First, choose a meal prep system that is easiest for you. If you're cooking dinner, double or triple up your portion so that you can have it for lunch or dinner the next day. Or choose a specific day or two in the week where you carve out a few hours to do your shopping and meal prep. You can also consider using meal prep companies if you have the money available to do so. And if you live with someone, have a chat with them about coming up with a meal prep system that you can both engage with. If you eat out a lot for work, you can make this happen as well, but it is a little bit trickier. You want to choose restaurants or cafes that have the calories on the menu, or choosing items that are a bit easier to fit in, like burrito bowls, steak and veggies, or chicken salads. For home cooking, I highly recommend using some of the following appliances and utensils: microwaves, slow cookers, air fryers, sandwich makers, blenders, rice cookers, large pans or woks, and if you're an ice cream fan, Ninja Creamy to make protein ice cream. Over my years of personal experience, these have made my life so much easier when I'm time poor. From a recipe perspective, I find that my clients do best when they have 10 to 15 recipes that they can use in rotation to cover all of their main meals throughout the week. Here's some simple examples for each meal that you can use. I'm not going to lecture you on why alcohol is bad. Nobody drinks thinking they're making a healthy choice for themselves. Instead, I'll solely focus on alcohol's role in fat loss, and I'll also give you a step-by-step process on how to include alcohol on a fat loss diet if you're so inclined. I'll talk about the calories in alcohol first, but there is a more problematic nature of alcohol that I will cover in a second. Alcohol is actually a fourth macronutrient in that it has around 7 calories per gram. If you drink, you can manage the calories coming from alcohol by knowing which are the lowest and which are the highest. This list will give you a bit of a guideline. As you can see, the spirit and diet mixers, seltzers, and light beer are going to be your best options, with wine and beer in the middle, and then cocktails being the worst because of their higher sugar and alcohol content. You can and should track alcohol in MyFitnessPal as if it was food because it does factor into your intake. The second step is a much more important one, and that's the psychological effects of alcohol. Alcohol is a disinhibitor, meaning it turns down areas of the brain involved in impulse control. You'll also eat more when you're drinking because not only does it reduce your impulse control, it also turns up your appetite. Think about how you snack more at parties or gorge on a family-sized pizza after a night out. We can mitigate this by having a filling, high-protein meal before your night out, and also just reducing the amount of alcohol you consume. Choosing lower alcohol drinks helps here, as well as staggering alcoholic drinks with non-alcoholic varieties throughout the night. It's also a good idea to establish a cutoff point, or as I like to call it, the fun threshold. I've given it this name because when you observe your drinking, there'll always be a point where having more alcohol will not actually make the experience any more fun, but it will make your decision making and hangover the next day significantly worse. Now, the final step is accepting that you will feel a bit worse for wear the next day, but stay committed to the process. Have some meals prepped the next day so you avoid getting the takeaway. Get out for a walk or a swim. And if you're really feeling up to it, get a light training session because you will feel much better after it. Now that you understand how a fat loss diet should be structured, let's talk about tracking your progress. There are many different ways to measure body fat, but most are either inaccurate or expensive and awkward. So we'll focus on 4 cheap and reliable methods. First is daily weighing. Every morning, get up, use the bathroom, and weigh yourself with minimal clothing on. Your scales should be set on a hard flat surface like tiles or a hardwood floor. Take note of your weight either on a sheet of paper in your bathroom or on your phone. Do this every day for a week. Add up all the numbers and divide by 7, and now you've got your weekly average. When you do this on consecutive weeks, you can start comparing the averages week to week. Over time, you'll start to see a trend emerge. What you'll notice are large fluctuations in your weight day to day. And this is because we're made up of 50 to 60% water, and there are a lot of things that affect this body water. Similar to how we might look at your calories or step count on a weekly or monthly basis, it's best to do this with your weight tracking as well. Changes in fat mass occur in tiny amounts between 24-hour days. Let's say it takes you 2 weeks to lose a kilo of body fat, which is actually excellent progress. That's a change of 70 grams of fat per day, which is impossible to measure. Then if you factor in muscle gain from resistance training, and yes, you can build muscle in a calorie deficit, this creates even more noise in the data. So this should illustrate to you why it's important to look at these weight trends across larger time frames. We can also cross-reference this data with other incredibly cheap or free methods. First are tape measurements at the waist, hip, arms and thighs. If you standardize the site of measurement here and take these on a weekly basis, they offer very valuable information in combination with the weight trend. Sometimes you can even have a situation where you don't lose that much weight on a given week, but you see more substantial changes in the centimeters from your tape measurements. Second up is progress photos. Again, we want to create standardization by using the same camera, the same background, the same lighting, and wearing the same clothes. Take pictures from the front, side, and back. You likely won't see big changes here from week to week, but more so from month to month. And finally, we have your clothes as a measure. Unless you're shrinking your clothes in the dryer, this is actually quite an accurate method. Changes in your shirts and jeans, or changes in your belt buckle notch are all quite reliable. So now you know how to measure progress. What is a reasonable measure of progress when it comes to fat loss? At Triage, we recommend clients shoot for between 0.5 and 1% body weight loss per week. And you can see this reflected in the calorie calculator from earlier. But for those of you that have more body fat to lose, you could probably go a little bit higher than this. You might also be asking, what is a good body fat percentage to shoot for? This can be hard to quantify because of different genetics. But as a general rule, men should shoot for between 10 and 16%, and women between 16 and 24% body fat. As we touched on at the start of the video, you won't be able to lose body fat forever on the same calories. So what do you do when your progress stalls? Use this 3-step system before you do anything else. First, you have to be certain that you're being as consistent as possible with your daily habits and inputs. Are you staying consistent with your calories and step count across the 7-day week? Or are you eating more because you're experiencing more hunger? Or are you moving less because of your metabolism adapting? If you're tracking calories, are you being as accurate and as consistent as possible? If you're satisfied with that, the second thing to consider is actually being certain that you've properly stalled. A good rule of thumb here is to take 2 to 3 weeks of seeing no progress on any of the measurements to be certain that you've actually stalled. Then, if you're happy with step 1 and 2, you can look to make a change. If not, get back working on your consistency or your patience with the process. If you've stalled, you must ask yourself, How far away am I from my goal? What effort is required to make that happen? And do I have the work capacity at the moment to make that happen? Life stress and other responsibilities heavily influence your ability to stick to a fat loss diet. So being honest with yourself is crucial to avoid unnecessary suffering. The reality is fat loss gets progressively harder the leaner you get. The first kilo and the last kilo are vastly different in terms of difficulty level. Sometimes it makes more sense to move to a maintenance phase where you focus more on building muscle rather than driving yourself into the ground to achieve a last kilo of weight loss. Generally speaking, if you've been in the calorie deficit consistently for 16 weeks or longer, you should consider taking a diet break, even if you have more to lose. A diet break will give you a psychological break from the diet, and it'll also positively impact your training because you'll be eating a bit more. We recommend that people take 1 to 2 weeks at maintenance calories before returning to the deficit. One important note here is that you do still need to be diligent with your food selection. Eat the same type of food that you would in a calorie deficit, but just increase your carbs and fats to meet the maintenance calories. If you start to include a lot more hyper-palatable or super tasty foods, you'll end up overshooting your maintenance calories and regaining a lot of the fat back that you lost. So keep that 80-20 rule in your mind here. The process of getting lean should be part of a larger process of building muscle and losing fat and getting to that ideal body composition. It's an incredibly rewarding process, but it can take multiple years, especially if you're coming from a baseline of higher body fat or lower muscle. Something I like to remind my clients of is that the time will pass anyway. So you may as well spend that time getting jacked, lean and healthy. I want to speak a little bit about sleep because it interacts quite heavily with fat loss, but we will have more in-depth videos on this topic. And if you'd like to read more, we actually have a comprehensive article on sleep that's on the Triage Method website, and I'll link that in the description. The main things you need to know about sleep is that it will directly interact with appetite, cravings, and your ability to lose body fat. If you're sleeping well, you'll have much better appetite control and you'll have an easier time sticking to that deficit. This study demonstrated that people who sleep less have lower levels of leptin, which is our feeling full hormone, higher levels of ghrelin, which is our appetite stimulation hormone, and a higher BMI overall. This study tested the difference in calories eaten between two groups that slept 4 hours and 8 hours. The group that only slept 4 hours consumed on average 560 calories more than the group that slept 8 hours. Needless to say, good sleep is essential for fat loss. However, it is important to note that you don't want to get too hung up on having a bad night's sleep here and there. Like everything, we must expect that you're going to have certain nights where your sleep is disrupted for a variety of reasons, and that's okay. We just work on making sure that the next night is a better sleep. As a guideline, try and get a minimum of 7 hours of sleep per night. Maintain a consistent sleep and wake time every day if possible. Keep your bedroom cool, dark and quiet. Avoid using technology and artificial light 1-2 hours before bed. And in the morning, try and get some sunlight exposure because this helps with the regulation of your body clock. And if you're really struggling with your sleep, there's a specific type of cognitive behavioral therapy that's shown to be effective. We've covered a lot so far, and honestly, if you begin implementing a lot of the stuff that we've covered to this point, you'll get on just fine. But I did want to mention a few supplements and special techniques that can be helpful when you're on this fat loss journey. Supplements won't have a huge effect on fat loss outcomes, but there's a few here that can be helpful to have in your arsenal. First up is caffeine. Caffeine can improve your fat loss results by a couple of mechanisms. First, it acts as an appetite suppressant, which, when combined with a high volume diet and good sleep, can make things a lot easier for you. Second, it can also slightly increase lipolysis, which is just a fancy term for your body turning fat into energy. This effect is small but notable. Caffeine can also be helpful for those of you that are doing time-restricted feeding or skipping your first meal of the day, but I would generally only use it before 12 p.m. because we don't want it to interrupt your sleep. Next up, we have protein powder, which has been mentioned a couple of times in the video so far. This is technically not a supplement and more of a food. As we talked about in the section on macros, increasing that protein intake will improve your appetite control. Any protein powder is fine here, just choose one that digests well for you and you like the taste. Finally, we have psyllium husk. This is quite simply just a fiber supplement, and like protein powder, it's just going to assist you in pulling one of those satiety levers. It's generally well tolerated by most people, and it makes it much easier for you to hit those fiber targets. While supplements can have a more modest effect on your fat loss results, there are a few psychological and behavioral techniques that can be massively helpful. First up is slow, mindful eating. This basically involves monitoring how fast you eat and then intentionally slowing down using a couple of techniques. We use usually start by getting clients to set a timer and then trying to take between 12 and 15 minutes to finish a full meal. This will likely be challenging for a lot of you, but you can work up to it. Some other helpful tips here include not eating at your work desk, not using your phone while you eat, putting your fork down between bites, drinking water between bites, using chopsticks, eating with your non-dominant hand, and generally trying to chew your food until it turns into a paste. This works quite well when combined with the fat loss diet guidelines mentioned throughout the video, and it can also improve your digestion as well. Next up, we have food environment design. You've likely heard this advice before, but it does work very well. Don't go shopping when you're hungry. Stick to your shopping list and don't buy foods that you know you'll overeat when you get home. If you do have sweets, chocolate or crisps in the house, keep them in the cupboard and away from your line of sight. Studies like this one show that our proximity to food and how easy it is to access will influence our eating behavior. Remember that food is more than just energy to us, and we eat for more reasons than physiological hunger. Hedonic hunger is where we eat purely for pleasure. And this is where food environment design can be really helpful to deal with the psychological side of eating. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone that loves getting into the details and discovering what the science says about health topics. Check out this next video to learn more about the science of health.